Getting into the world of tracking guitars can seem both simple and confusing at the same time. There's a lot that really does go into it that can take you some time to figure out, which is why I'm making this video to give you all the information and tips that you need when it comes to this process so you don't make the same mistakes I did when I was trying to figure out how to do all this the right way. We're going to talk about phase issues, the most basic recording setup and what you would need to get started, different techniques that can make your sound so much wider with your recordings, things that you can experiment with, and other cool tips and tricks like that. Now, the way that I'll be demonstrating this tracking process is by miking up amps and guitars. There are obviously other ways to do this, like recording directly into your amp simulators or your interfaces and not using any mics at all. But there will still be tips in this video that can be used by everybody, no matter your setup. What's going on, guys? Welcome to my channel. My name is Matt. I post weekly guitar videos that can help you improve not only your playing skills, but your performing and recording abilities, as well as understanding other things like gear and tone. So the first thing I'm going to be talking about when tracking guitars is something called double tracking. Double tracking can widen your guitar's sound and make the tune sound much more beefy and in your face. Here's an example of what double tracking sounds like compared to just recording a single track. So double tracking is when you record a guitar part and then you record the same exact guitar part again on top of that. When you double track, you can pan one of the tracks all the way to the left and the other one all the way to the right, which will give it that wider sound. Now, the benefits don't just stop there. When you record two of the same parts, you also have more to work with later on in the mixing process. You may not need all of these doubles, but they can certainly be helpful. Now, in order for double tracking to sound perfect, you have to be able to play almost the exact same part, which is why for guitar solos, this technique can be a bit annoying and sometimes unrealistic, which is why I mainly only double track rhythm parts and some melodies. And maybe, depending if the solo is simple enough, I do the lead stuff as well. Now, double tracking isn't a necessary thing to do if you don't want to do it or you don't have the time to do it. It just makes your recording sound so much fuller and exciting, so it's definitely something that I recommend trying out. Now, this leads me into my next tip: plan ahead. And by plan ahead, I mean, what type of sound are you going for? How much time do you want to take with tracking? What gear are you using? Do you want to record wet or dry? It wouldn't be a good idea to blindly go into tracking your parts because you probably won't get the end result that you desire. Your decisions will change based on how you're going to go about this process. If you want to add all the wet effects later on, like reverbs and delays, then it's important that you know that you're going to record dry. A great mix and a wonderful final product will not be possible without great recordings. Shitty recordings that are out of phase, which I'll get into later in this video, out of time, and other things like that will be very hard for the mix to clean up and fix. It's like polishing a turd. Yeah, it looks a little better, but it's still a turd. But when you have a plan and have a better sense of what you want, you can then follow that set plan that will lead you into a great final product. Now, I just mentioned something called phase. Phase is only an issue if you're using two or more mics at the same time when you're recording. So for example, if you were to record your guitar amp and you use two mics, that's when you have to start checking for phase. If you're just using one mic, then you have nothing to worry about at all. Now, phase issues can completely ruin your sound and recordings, so it's really important you get it right. To the untrained ear, it may be hard for you to hear and notice if something's out of phase. But once you understand this, you'll be able to catch it. Now, how do you check for phase? There's tons of ways you can do it, but here's how I like to do it. So I have two recordings right here. This one's gonna be in phase and this one will be out of phase. The first mic is the SM57 and the second mic is a WA47 Junior or Warm Audio. So let's take a look at the first recording and check out what an in-phase track looks like. So as you can see, it looks very organized. Both of these tracks, the SM57 and the WA47 Junior, they're paralleling each other. You can see for this track that the bump above the line is doing the same thing for this track right here as well. They're not fighting against each other. They're both doing the same exact thing, and that is a good sign, and that means that it's in phase. So now let's take a look at the out of phase tracks and see what that looks like. And we can see that it's looking very inconsistent compared to the in phase tracks. Now, for example, right here, we have a little bump going above the line, but on this track, it's going below the line. That means both of these recordings and tracks and mics are fighting against each other, which will ruin and take away from your sound. So when you put them both up against each other and they're not following the same path, like if this one's up, this part should be up as well. If it's going down, that's when you know you are out of phase. All right, so now that you learned how to look if you're out of phase or in phase, let's now hear the differences between the two. So the next thing that ties into phasing is mic placements. Different placements will give you a different sound. You can angle the mics, you can have it in different places in front of the speaker, like the center, top, bottom, right, and left. The ways you can do this are almost endless, but you have to figure out what works best for the sound that you are going for. If you'd like to hear different sound comparisons of different mic placements, I will link a video down in the description that I made a couple months back going over all of the different types of placements you can use, and I even do some experimenting as well. So make sure to check that video out after watching this one. Now let's say you're new to this process and you're really not sure how or where to get started. Here's the most basic home recording setup that anybody can have. First things first, you need a computer with a digital audio workstation. There's a lot of free options, but there's also ones that you can pay for as well. Now the free ones, you obviously aren't going to be able to do all the things that you can do with the paid ones, but if you're just getting started, a free digital audio workstation is all you really need. You can try out GarageBand for free. You can even do a free trial of Logic Pro. You can do a free trial of Ableton. Whatever. In most cases, all DAWs pretty much do the exact same thing. So it's more about the functionality of it and how it blends with your workflow. Now the next thing you'll need is an interface. This will be the thing that connects to your computer and your DAW. There are a million different interfaces, and from experience, cheaper ones will give you some trouble. I bought this audio box USB 96 for about $100 for when I travel, when I just want to record some acoustic guitars or something. And it does get the job done, but it picks up a lot of bad frequencies sometimes. And when I'm recording guitars through it and that happens, it pretty much ruins the entire tracks and I have to re-record everything. My main interface is much larger and much better quality that my friend let me borrow for a little while, and this gives me absolutely no issues. Now, do you need an interface like this to get started? Definitely not. I personally recommend getting the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2. This is one of the best interfaces you can get for the money. You're not going to have many issues with it, and it's really easy to use. Now with the interface, this is where we plug in our microphones using XLR cables and miking up amps and guitars. You adjust the levels through the interface to make sure you avoid clipping and other things like that. Now you can also plug your guitar cable right into it and use amp simulators and record it directly in without miking up anything. This is definitely easier, and depending on your amp simulator, it may even sound better too. It just all depends on your setup. Now for the very last and most important tip, when tracking guitars, you need to avoid clipping. Clipping happens when your levels are just way too high, and when you go to record, the levels jump up into the red zone, which will cause your tracks to sound fuzzy and distorted, but not in a good way. It's very difficult to fix this issue in post-production or when you're mixing. The track would be pretty much ruined at that point, which is why it's so important to record at lower levels. It's very easy to check if you are clipping, and I really recommend doing this every time before you record, just to make sure you're not going to have any problems later on down the road. Just play your guitar, and if you start to see red on your DAW or on your interface, then you simply just lower the channel levels on the interface. Just remember this, it's easier to boost quiet, low-level tracks than it is to reduce clipped tracks. So if you remember that, you'll be all good to go. Now, all these tips I gave in this video are just a few of the many I could have covered. I was coming up with more and more as I was working out what I was going to be talking about for this video. So depending on how helpful this video was to you, I'll make a part 2 sometime in the near future. So thanks for watching. Let me know down in the comments what questions you may have about the recording process, and I'll see you guys next week.